Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. A couple of interesting footnotes here. I got an email from Chris Abbott saying we need to have a talk, and I agree entirely with that. I hope that Barney Dicker might listen to this and also think that maybe somewhere over the past year's worth of stuff, there's been at least a couple of things worth talking to me about. That'd be really nice. And Matthew Gibson, who's, I don't know, completely fallen off, but I really would like to have a chat with Matthew Gibson on this podcast too. It's funny how just one email from Chris Abbott can make me reflect heavily on all the people who I'd like to chat with in this podcast sometime in the foreseeable future. My mother arrived from Australia and she brought with her Puffin Book of Armour, which is from 1960, Puffin Book number 97, which is the Book of Armour. And this was a book that my grandparents had, so I only had access to it in my time spent in Adelaide in South Australia. But it was such a central book to me that I looked at it. It's incredibly brittle, so I immediately went on AB Books and found the two books on offer in the US that I could order. So I ordered the better quality version, which I think was in very good condition. Who knows if it'll be as brittle as my current copy, but I looked through it last night and it just brought back so much imagery. It also reminded me that actually, although I own D&D books, there are a bunch of additional books that made the tapestry of my interest in fantasy and role-playing and these kind of things, and this was one of them, which so beautifully rests outside, well, it was created 16 years before I was born. So, you know, these books that created this tapestry of my interest in fantasy is very well represented in front of me in terms of my books that I have, with books that were clearly incredibly important, a bunch of stuff that wasn't that important, a bunch of old magazines that I never read the originals of, but, you know, I have the magazine so I can have a complete set of, you know, White Dwarves from some time to some other time anyway. So thumbing through this Book of Armour made by Puffin Books in the 1960s reminded me very closely that it wasn't just particular books, which I have represented currently. It was a wide tapestry of books of which I don't have represented currently. So anyway, one of the things my mother and I do, so much so that she actually brings books to do this, is we put books in the local lending library, which is something, I don't know how many houses are in our area, maybe 25, maybe 50 probably closer to 50 in the gated community that I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. And there were a bunch of Pathfinder rule books. In fact, there were a series of books which indicated that the person who owned the books either was the publisher of the books or for some reason had 5 versions of exactly the same book. Well, 5 of exactly the same book, not even versions of exactly the same book, but 5 of exactly the same book. So I went there and made sure that I had a full set of all the stuff that they had, which still left a sizable pile of stuff. So I thought, well, I need to write a note to them. So if you're friends with me on Facebook or you're a member of the My Rules Are Better Facebook page, you will see the letter, which I included and showed. I think hopefully it will display to people who aren't friends with me on Facebook. I forgot to think about that when I gave the permissions. I just reposted it. So if you can't see the picture on Facebook, let me know and I'll make it a universally available picture. Anyway, so got home, wrote a note to the community, which I made 4 copies of and put back down. Ironically, I went to the lending library this morning to see what had happened. The 4 copies were still there. Someone had taken the top copy, which I had put on top of the Pathfinder rulebooks, and put it under the first Pathfinder rulebook, which I thought was, well, whatever that was. Clearly someone is a neatness freak more than they are a role-playing game freak. So my anticipation is to get at least one person in the community who is interested in this kind of stuff communicating. Now, I know because the community had a yard sale that there was one person who was selling Lord of the Rings swords, like literally the proof of lineage of these swords, the Lord of the Rings movies. I thought, well, that's probably the person who has the Pathfinder rulebooks. Probably. I remember looking inside the house because the garage was open and you could see into the house, and I have a lot of these things that have their little bits on them. I have some Games Workshop pictures that have their, proof of origin status on them as well, which I think I got put on the back of the pictures when I had them framed. My mother also bought a brass rubbing, which was another thing from my grandparents' house that I'm going to have to work out how I can get framed. But I have that wrapped up and ready to unroll. I have a bunch of stuff from the Australian War Memorial as well, which I think has probably lost to the sands of time. And my hope is that I'll get to another tube. In fact, I'm pretty sure I have another tube that has stuff from the Australian War Memorial in it. So hopefully I'll get that made into glass-backed pictures at some stage. I'm looking in my room and realizing that even the light fixtures, that when you turn on, the lights come on through various power plugs, which is very boring if you plug in iPhone recharges into these things, because mysteriously the power plug is never the right power plug. Anyway, this has been a very rambling My Rules Are Better. Oh, I did want to say one other thing. Rochi, whose name rhymes with crotch, still ongoing with the lead pile. I recorded, and I also put in the letter, I should point this out, this particular podcast for anyone who discovers the letter and is sufficiently interested in role-playing or fantasy to get in contact. Who knows if anyone will ever get in contact with me from this one thing. But it was a message in the bottle, as I put on Facebook, to see if others, like-minded folk, might get back in contact. Oh, final thing. The 3 books are being graphic designed by a friend of mine, but my mother is actually doing the proofreading on the 3 books. She did the proofreading on 2 of the 3 books when she was last here. So she's doing it again with the view that this is going to be something that's very special. And probably, I can't foresee me, unless it becomes a amazing success, which has never been the case with anything I've ever written historically. It is just going to be a curio, which hopefully listeners to this podcast will... I should offer a discount, actually. Discount code for listeners to this podcast to get their hands on these 3 books. But anyway, they're being very beautifully designed in the style of Penguin books from the 1960s. So that is something that I can put in a... Who knows if anyone will ever see these things, but they're certainly taking a bit of time and a bit of money currently to design. So, Tom Barbalet in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out.